Like, it's okay to have bad days. And I think leaders and pastors and just Christians, just fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, hear us. Like, it's okay to have a bad day.
Absolutely.
Like, it's okay, to feel down in the dump. Now, don't let a bad day become a bad season. Right. Surround yourself with life-giving people, be in the word, remind yourself of what's true. But man, again, Pastor Rhett is one of my overseers. He knows this. I've called him on bad days. We've had conversations. We've had real difficult conversations about what does the future look like if things don't change? What if, because all of those things have to be real conversations, and praise God, we're in a situation where this past July, I was able to go full time with the church. And I don't think I would have ever envisioned that a year ago. I would have wanted to have the faith for it, but honestly, I wouldn't even allow myself to have the faith for it because I would have just felt like I was going to be disappointed.
What is going on, Armchair Authentic podcast family? It is great to welcome you back to another episode of the podcast with your friends, Rhett and Justin. Today, we're looking forward to an in-depth conversation with a friend of ours, Scott Lawrence. Scott is a church planter and the founding pastor of Keys Church in Kissimmee, Florida. In today's conversation, we talk about the faith and perseverance it takes to step out of your comfort zone to plant a church and the leadership lessons learned along the way, especially when things don't turn out the way you hoped and planned that they would. We can't wait to dive into this conversation, but before we do, we always want to take a moment and say thank you to every single one of you who have taken the time to rate and review the podcast. Man, it means so much to Justin and I, but more than that, it truly is the best way we can serve those who aren't on this journey yet. Now, if you're new to the show, thank you so much for tuning in. Listen, would you do us a favor? Would you go to Instagram or Facebook and follow us at Armchair Authentic? That's at Armchair Authentic. You can also follow us and find us on X. That's at Armchair Auth Pod. That's Armchair Auth, AUTHPOD. One more thing I want to encourage every single one of you to do, and that is, if you're enjoying this podcast, if it's blessing you or inspiring you or even encouraging you in any way, could you do us a favor? Would you take a moment to pull out your phone, copy the link from your favorite podcast platform, and send it to a friend? Man, that would mean so much to us. Thank you. All right, now on to the conversation with our friend, Scott Lawrence, church planter and founding pastor of Keys Church in Kissimmee, Florida. Justin, I'm really excited today. We have one of our dear friends, Scott Lawrence, pastor, founding pastor, I might say, of Keys Church in Kissimmee, Florida, with us on the podcast. Scott, it's so great to have you as a guest today.
Man, guys, I am incredibly honored to be here. If I'm being honest with you, I don't feel worthy to be on here with you guys. And so this really is an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Man, it's so good to have you too. And, we've met before, and we were talking about that before we got started with our recording, but I'm really excited to just dive in and hear about your story because I've heard it secondhand as you and Rhett are closer in relationship, and he has shared so many stories about you and the steps you've taken the past few years in preparing for what you're doing now. So Rhett, just I'll yield to you to set this conversation up because I'm really looking forward to diving in with Scott.
Yeah, so for our listeners who may not know, Scott and I go back, and honestly, Scott, I was literally trying to think of when you and I first met. So it would have been at our time at Ridge Church in Wetumpka, Alabama. For those who don't know my story, there was a time of transition, 2 seasons of transition. One when I was coming off staff at Church of the Highlands, trying to find my next season. I helped Pastor Tripp Healy, who was a guest on our podcast at one moment. And that was around 2014 of the summer.
Yeah.
And Scott, I wasn't sure if you were there yet in that season. I don't think you were. And so then I went on to serve another church, and I believe it was when I was at a church in Mobile, and my continued relationship as an overseer for Pastor Tripp and Ridge Church that you came on staff at Ridge. Yep. And I believe that's when you and I started to connect. So, but I can't, you're one of those friends that I feel like I've known you forever, but I can't go back and go, when is that moment?
You can't remember the origin story.
Yeah, the origin story.
Where did it begin? I would think 2016,
okay.
Right? So we ended up at Ridge, although we visited some in 2014 when we had moved to Wetumpka. Okay. We really didn't make the decision to call it our home church until Easter of 2015. And then it was January of 2016 where me and my wife, Kirsten, went on staff there. And so I would imagine it would have been sometime in that first year, right, that we were on staff would have been the first time we met. I heard of you and who you were, but I didn't have the honor and the pleasure of meeting you, I think, until maybe sometime, I would imagine the end of 2016.
Man, I love it. All I know is this. When you meet a friend who you immediately connect with, you're like, all right, I'm not just saying this for the podcast's sake, but I remember when we first connected, I was like, this is a guy that I could do life with for the rest of my life. I mean, you and your wife, Kirsten, and your entire family. I mean, you guys, I can't wait to dive into your story because I really can't. I feel like I'm bringing Scott into the living room and introducing him to all these people that are, our listeners and our friends. And I want you to love them as much as I do. And I know you will once you hear a story. But your faithfulness, your ability to be just sacrificing your life, your family, and investing everything into serving Pastor Tripp and Ridge Church and helping it become all that it is today. And in that journey, and us connecting and having fun and, through my season of church planting, coming back through Wetumpka before we launched in Boise, Idaho, actually Nampa, Idaho, and planting One Life Church. We just had a lot of connects and a lot of conversations. And through that, God began to pour into you and your heart and your family a crazy desire and just to leave everything you've ever known to take a step of faith from the comfort zone and into the abyss of nothing, just trusting God and planting Keys Church. And so our heart is to have real conversations with real people about real life. And my brother, you are living real life, and you are an example of that as a dad, as a husband, and as a leader, spiritual leader in planting a church. And so I kind of talk me through that. Like, what in the world talked you into taking a step out of an associate pastor role, doing things on a high level for Ridge Church, into planting a church in the Orlando, Kissimmee, Florida area?
Yeah. Stop me if you've heard this one before. I never had the desire to be a lead pastor. Just wasn't on my radar. When I felt called into ministry originally, I was thinking student ministry, as many people do. I don't have the gift of playing instruments or leading worship in any way, shape, or form. And so I didn't know at the time that the Lord had gifted me to communicate the gospel effectively. And so I just knew he had gifted me to love people and to mentor people and to disciple people. And as it is with most young people, I was in my early 20s, it was like, well, clearly that must be to student ministry. And there was an experience that I had as a teenager doing student ministry, being a part of a student ministry in which I went to this church, and I went there for a season with me and my wife, Kirsten, were just dating at the time. But I remember going, and it wasn't an overly big student ministry, but I remember the youth pastor didn't even know who I was. He never talked to me. He never introduced himself to me. I wasn't part of like the in group. It was kind of one of those student ministries, and by no fault of his. I'm sure his heart was in the right place. And, I was probably just another kid who was coming in, and he didn't know how long that kid was going to stick around, But I remember I didn't feel seen, and I didn't feel loved, and I didn't feel that way from the church. And so when I had a real encounter with Jesus, I was baptized at a young age at 7, but went to a Christian high school. But when I really encountered Jesus at 19 and started following him and never turned back, and then when I felt called into ministry, all I could ever think was, I never want anyone to feel the way that I felt. I never want anyone to feel like they're not seen. I don't ever want anyone to feel like they're not known, that they're not loved, because it's what we believe, right? There's a God who sees you and knows you and loves you and wants a relationship with you. And I thought, man, there was so much heartache in my life and bad decisions that I made that could have been avoided had somebody just loved me and taken me under their wing and discipled me, right? And so then I wanted to do that for other people. And I was just like, well, that must mean student ministry.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's the natural step. And
well, can I just interrupt you for a second? You say natural step. For me, that was never a natural step. I didn't want nothing to do with youth ministry because I knew how crazy I was as a youth. I was like, I don't want to deal with that. Can you put me around the adults, please?
Scott, I'm with you. I love student ministry. It was a highlight of me and my wife Summer's life for many years. So I'm tracking with you. And I can identify too, jumping in, how you had that feeling of being really excluded or just being invisible. I remember that, Red. I remember that from both of us before we really surrendered our life to Christ. We stepped into a youth ministry to check it out, and it was like the club, and we were not members, and we found our way out of there. So I remember that feeling, and then it would turn out for us where we'd step back into the same youth ministry, this time having an encounter with God. Our lives are surrendered, and we all of a sudden were the in crowd, and we made it our aim because of what we went through. Mm-hmm. We began bringing in any of the outsiders who felt invisible, and it made such a change in them, and it became a ministry to me and Rhett. So when you said that all that popped into my head because I remember the Scott Lawrence kid, who felt excluded because I was that once, and when I was given an influence, the first thing I wanted to do was to utilize my pain and actually give some purpose behind it and help somebody else. So I resonate. I know Rhett doesn't.
Yeah, my heart. Yeah.
Rhett doesn't because he didn't like students. But
No. I want to say, to clarify, I already come from the assumption that our friends in the community that follow us and listen know that, of course, I love students. But I just did not have this driving passion. Well, let me just start in students. I mean, you and I served in the youth group, and God did a lot of things in development in that for sure.
Our world was worship.
Yeah, it was worship. And so give me a song, give me an instrument, give me a mic. I'm all good. Day. But if I don't have to sit there and have to preach, because I never wanted to preach or communicate nothing. Let me sing. I'll sing all day. I don't care. But preach a message, forget that. I didn't want nothing to do with that. And then
I didn't either. And I don't know, I guess in my brain, I didn't put two and two together at the beginning that being in student ministry would mean that I had to speak in front of students. Because I started as a volunteer at the church that we were going to at the time, and just loved investing in students and leading a small group and just those type things. And here's a funny story for you. I can remember the first time that I was asked to speak in front of students. We did this thing on Sunday because it was a bigger church of close to 1,500, 2,000 people. And they were meeting at a hotel in a ballroom. And so downstairs during the second service, we would do a little student thing for the students who were part of the first service, or maybe they were, coming to the second service and didn't want to sit in the service with their parents. And we called it Rewind. And really what we would do is, the way this pastor preached is that he he essentially had his whole outline and you filled in stuff, right? And so kind of rewinding the sermon and just giving the highlights of the sermon. When you talk about the easiest thing that you could possibly do, right? You're reading off of a sheet of paper. And I remember the student pastor being like, "Hey man, I want you to lead today." And I was like, I don't think that's a good idea. Actually, let's not do that. And we're talking 15 to 20 kids in this room, right? Where it's not like I have 500 kids in front of me. And I remember standing up there and I start talking and leading the discussion, and I literally froze. I got so nervous and so in my head,
crazy,
that I started stuttering at one point, and I just stopped talking. And man, praise the Lord for this gracious youth pastor who was leading me at the time, who stepped in and bailed me out in front of these kids. I was so embarrassed. I was like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. I'm an idiot. I can't show my face at this church again. This is how I'm feeling, right?
Yeah.
And he literally told me, he was like, "Hey, I want you to lead it next week too."
Oh man, that's awesome.
And you talk about leadership, right? Mm-hmm. And seeing something in someone that they didn't see in themselves. Wow. And kind of the rest is history, man. And the next week it wasn't an issue, thanks to the power of the Holy Spirit in my life, because it was not me, right? And then one opportunity led to another, to him saying, "Hey, I want you to speak on a Wednesday night," to then this church planted its first campus, and they asked me to go be the student pastor at that campus to start the student ministry at the second campus. And that was really my introduction into ministry.
Well, props to your leader, first of all, to give you that second chance, because that could have been devastating, and it could have made you feel like you just helped me confirm my calling is not to do that, and never gave you a chance, and you would have had to live with potentially the embarrassment or the shame of that moment. So props to your leader who gave you another chance, knowing it could be messy, and you did better than the previous, and then it seems like there was the stair step where it kept getting better and better and led by the Holy Spirit. But props to the leadership there.
And the multiplication that happened from his investment in belief in you. Because
that's right.
You know, with what Justin just said, I mean, if you think about it, in my mind, big picture, God could have still shown up and moved in your life, but Keys Church might not have even been planted.
Right.
Had it not been for somebody investing into you. Now, you won't say this about yourself, but I will, because I'm your friend. I'm also one of your overseers, which is a huge honor in my life to get to be a part of Keys Church and just who you are and your wife. But what I would say is this: if you're listening, go to keyschurch.com and listen to some of his messages. He's an excellent communicator, and he does an amazing job stewarding the gift of communication. And you are a student of communication, and I've seen you grow throughout the years. And so you've always had this heart of learning and how can I get better, not just so you can stand out, but so that God can shine in and through you in a way there are no distractions. And you're doing an excellent job and an amazing job. And you've been flying under the radar, I'll tell you that right now, in some circles and some scenes. But I want you to know that you're an excellent communicator. And I never knew that story. That's amazing to me because, you know, some pastors, if you're listening today, as Justin mentioned, and as you just said, like, you got to give people a chance to fail.
Yeah,
and believe in them and give them opportunities, because they might just be the next church planner in your church several years down the road.
And then even just the whole creative side that you have, because as Rhett was talking about the website, not only listen to the message, but man, the website's awesome. I mean, just the way that you've designed it, I'm really into seeing how different people are just wired. I mean, we're just so uniquely designed, and you have even getting, you know, people can't see you because we're audio only, but you just kind of have such a creative vibe to you. And even the website, everything that you do, it seems to be well done. So just wanted to add that on top of it too. So whatever was happening in that process of developing communication in your leadership, you've also learned along the way somewhere, I don't know if it was just innate in you or what, but just an excellence too of putting together stuff as simple as a website.
He's the Levi Lusko of Osceola County.
Wow, those are big compliments right there.
I just want you to know. Quite the compliment. I wouldn't go there.
I mean, dude's got style. Dude can communicate. Dude can love people. Can create atmospheres and moments for people to experience the presence of God and just being who you are. And that's why I appreciate you saying earlier, you don't feel worthy to be on this podcast. I'm like, are you kidding me, dude? Like, your faith, your obedience, your sacrifice, your investment, what y'all have done, and the more things we'll talk about as this conversation goes on. I mean, the grit and the grind and the tenacity that you guys have had to step out in faith and to create something that didn't exist. I mean, that's inspiring, bro. That, to me, that's huge. And so it's an honor for us to have you on this podcast and to dive in a little bit more of your story. And so thanks for taking a minute to share some of that, because I think everybody can resonate with the insecurity and the vulnerability and the, I don't want to do this, but then somebody believes in me and gives me an opportunity and to take a step.
And then even to hear the part of it started when you were younger, how that led into now you're serving at Ridge Church. You end up meeting Red at some point. So around those years of 2016, 17, whenever that is. But something begins to stir inside of you. Can you talk us through that process? Here you are at Ridge Church. What were you doing at Ridge? Was it students?
Yeah, so I would say the story of my ministry career, for lack of a better term, is people seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself. And so Pastor Tripp Healy, who I know y'all have had as a guest on the podcast,
yes, love him.
He jokingly tells the story that the first time that we sat down with him, me and my wife, and they were going to ask us to take over some leadership stuff because leaders recognize leaders, right? And so him and his wife Rebecca were like, "Hey, we need y'all to come help with some stuff," because they were only a year and a half in, and they needed some help, and they were asking us to help take over kids ministry, and then that would lead to me inevitably doing student ministry. But in that first conversation, I told him, I said, "Yeah, man, I'll do anything that you want me to do, as long as it doesn't have to do with computers and technology, because like I'm not like that's just not who I am." So man, even for you to be shocking. Like, "Oh man, like you're creative and your vibe and your website," and it's like it's laughable
That's
to
funny.
think eight years ago, and then to think now. And that's just through the Holy Spirit and people calling out things in me and realizing like, I do have value here. I do have ideas when it comes to these things. I do have vision for stuff that maybe I just never even knew I was allowed to have that vision. And other people gave me the freedom to have that vision. And then, I was able to run with it. And Pastor Tripp is such a great leader at giving people the ball in ministry and then letting them run with it.
Yeah.
And he literally handed me and my wife Kirsten the vision and said, now run with it. Like, here are the guardrails. Like, here are the boundary lines. Like, just stay within the vision of what we're doing here at Ridge Church and go. And we did. And because we did, at some point, we were over every single area of the church with the exception of finances. And that's not an exaggeration, because at one point your boy was in charge of the worship team, even though I don't have a worship leading bone in my body. Like I scheduled people and I helped with Ableton, as much of a struggle as that was. And like, I helped with everything and I facilitated stuff because they were just like, hey, if we know if we give it to Scott or if we give it to Kirsten that it'll get done, and it'll get done with some form of excellence, because they're always just going to put their best foot forward and try to do it to the best of their ability. Wow. And so over time, at Ridge, it was just kids ministry, and then kind of evolved into all the family ministry as I took over students. And then a need arose to like, hey, could I train you how to do some of this stuff on video and just doing video announcements? And then it was like, how would you feel about being in front of a camera doing video announcements? And I was like, I would rather not, to be completely honest with you, but like, if you want me to, I will. And it was like, the first time I did it, it was like, cool, well, this is going to be your job from now on, is to do the video announcements. And for any young leaders listening, I would say this: every opportunity that I was ever given, specifically at Ridge Church, was never an opportunity that I asked for. I just tried to serve my pastor and his vision well with whatever he asked me to do. So for instance, I never asked for a platform. I never asked to speak to students. I was asked to start speaking to students. I never asked to lead a team huddle. I was asked to lead a team huddle. I never asked to give announcements on a Sunday morning. I was asked to get on the platform and give announcements. I never asked to preach a sermon. I like to say I was voluntold that I was going to preach.
I've never heard that.
For the very first time.
Believe it.
I'm glad.
That's a new word.
I'm really glad that you're pointing that out, because if you weren't, I was going to. What I'm hearing is a man who just walked in humility and faithfulness. You loved God. You loved your family. You loved the local church. You had the spirit of availability to say, God, like, I'm here. And I'll be willing to say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I'm hearing is I'm willing to say yes to everything for you and for your glory. And so, but because of your faithfulness and because of your availability and your teachability and your humility, it's amazing how it opened up doors, and you were willing to say yes to walk through those doors.
Yeah. And so it was 2017, Memorial Day weekend of 2017 was the first time that I ever taught a big boy sermon, is how I talk about it, where I taught on a Sunday morning in front of the whole church. It's a big church sermon. And I taught that message, and Pastor Tripp's comments the moment I got off stage was, well, awesome, you're going to have a series next year. So like, this is good. Like, wow. I can trust you. And so, which of course I was honored, because I took it and take it very serious, communicating the gospel. I know it's a big deal, and I never want to take that for granted. And so, that just led to more opportunities to teach on a Sunday. And in the beginning, if I'm being honest, I hated it.
You hated communicating?
I hated communicating.
What do you think that was? Was it the insecurity inside of you?
Yeah, it's absolutely insecurity.
Okay.
Like, that's a big part of it. I think also not recognizing yet the way that God had gifted me creatively. And so thinking about having to give a sermon illustration or teach a message or tie it together, and still learning. In the beginning, you're learning how to be a communicator. You're learning how to preach the gospel properly. You're learning all of these things, and it felt like a burden. It just did. Like, this thought of like communicating to people who I'd had an insecurity where I hadn't gone to seminary or anything like that. So I'm like, there are people who are listening who are smarter than me, who know more than me. And here I am trying to speak to them. At the time, I was 26, 27 years old. And I'm like, I'm just this young dude. Like, everybody thinks I'm a fraud. Like, that's what that's what the insecurity is telling me.
Oh yeah.
Is that I'm fake, and they know that I'm fake. And I can remember the Lord just wrestling with me. And I remember the moment that I felt the Lord just tell me, like, don't despise the gift that I've given you. Like if this is a gift, just don't despise it. And that really convicted me, because I realized that's exactly what I was doing. That there were people who, and of course, I think this happens to almost every communicator, right? Like, generally you don't get off the stage and people are like, that was terrible. Maybe. If so, I'm so
not
sorry.
in the South. Most people in the South are very kind. And, God bless. That was awesome.
Everybody's just South.
At least to your face.
In the South, they're so nice. But I always had people would tell me, like, man, that was great. That was the best message I've ever heard. You're so gifted. Like, I heard that time and time again. And I remember literally praying and being like, God, like, I don't think I want this to be my gift. Is there another gift that you could give me? Because this feels like a burden. And again, I just had that moment with the Lord in which I felt like he was telling me that I was despising the very thing that he was trying to give me to be a blessing to other people. And it changed my perspective on how I viewed communicating and how I viewed the opportunities that I was given to communicate. And I decided to make the change of, no matter how hard it is and no matter how hard it feels, that I was going to view every opportunity to communicate the gospel as, not that I wasn't, viewing it as an honor or a blessing or, an incredible opportunity, but I was also viewing it as a burden. And I had to repent and say, Lord, forgive me for despising the thing that you've blessed me to be able to do, and help me to do this through the power of your Holy Spirit to the best of my ability. And honestly, Pastor Rhett, you were so gracious in saying that I've grown as a communicator, which obviously I have. A lot of that's repetition just over the years. But I think a big part of that too is just changing perspective.
Yeah.
Right. And saying, okay, Lord, if this is how you've gifted me, then I always want to put my best foot forward. And we know for anybody who's listening and has had to communicate week in and week out, like, you're not going to hit a home run every week. Like, that's just impossible. Like, you can't put that pressure on yourself. But what I can do every week is be biblical and be life-giving and give people the hope of Jesus. And that's just it for me. Is it biblical? Does it point people to Jesus? Like, that's really all that matters.
So when you said that you surrendered, first of all, having the desire to speak it wasn't something you wanted. You started getting affirmation from people, which, once again, that's the value of affirmation. It's such a powerful thing when people speak, you say it, you see it, but you surrendered it. What was the main difference you felt in that moment? Like, you went up there feeling like it's a burden. Do you remember feeling a sense of, now when Jesus says, my yoke is easy, my burden's light, did you feel that sense of surrender? And now when you spoke, that you felt like, wow, this is still tough for me. I don't want to accept it. I'm being kind of a slave to this by choice. Or did you really feel like, did that discipline turn into some kind of a delight towards speaking?
Yeah. I would say that in the beginning, it still felt like a burden, even though I wasn't going to allow myself to view it as a burden.
Yeah.
It wasn't, unfortunately, it wasn't immediate that I was like, oh, this has gotten easy. And honestly, here we are 2 years and, over 2 years into our church plant. And it's probably really only in the last 6 months that I feel like this has gotten easier. Not that it's easy. It's still, a burden, from the sense of communicating the gospel should be something that is heavy on us and burdens us. But to your point, it absolutely feels like, okay, my yoke is easy. My burden is light. I feel that now. And I didn't feel that, I made that surrender three plus years ago, and it took 2.5 years later for it to finally start feeling easier.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of the story of Moses in the burning bush in the Old Testament, where Moses is in the desert. He's really trying to escape the purpose that God has for his life, if you will. Like he really doesn't even truly understand where he is in this whole God process of being an Israelite. But God speaks to him. And it's interesting that he begins to argue with God and like, hey, God, I'm not a good speaker. I'm not a great communicator. I stutter. I'm like, I like all these excuses of why I shouldn't be operating in something you're calling me to. This feels like a burden. Like, do you know who you're talking to? Yeah. Like, and that's kind of what I'm hearing from you. It's like, I feel like God has given me a gift and he's asking me to use it, but I'm not necessarily sure I want to use it because it's pretty heavy and I take it, it's a lot of work. It's churning, and God, there could be so many other people that are better than me. But okay, Lord, if you're calling me to do this, then all right, I'll do it. And you surrender to it. And I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability, because some people go, oh man, preaching's the best thing in the planet. I love it. I long for it. And I'm like, are you even a real human? Because like, it's the biggest chore for me as a communicator, and having planted a church and having done it for 4 years straight, I mean, it was a burden. And it's a spiritual burden and a weight that you, if you're truly walking in the fear of the Lord and the reverence of God and the awe of God, there's this heaviness to know, Lord, I'm just human and you're holy, and I really want to get this right. I don't want to mislead anybody. I know that those who teach are going to be judged more strictly and looked at and held more accountable. And I just feel the weight of that. And I know who I am because I can relate to you, man. I feel like one of the disciples, the book of Acts, you got the disciples and the Pharisees are calling out the disciples and they're going, man, these are a bunch of idiots. Like, but we can tell they've been with Jesus. We can't argue the fact that although they're uneducated, if you will, that there's something different. There's something powerful that's happening in and through their lives. And so I can relate to that. And so the insecurities there for me were just the same. And so that's why I love our podcast. And that's one reason I wanted to have you on it as a guest for those leaders who might be struggling and thinking, man, I'm like, am I normal? I'm like, why is this so hard? Is this supposed to be a chore? Is this supposed to be a burden? But I'm gifted in it and I'm fighting it. But yet, just kind of the struggle and the perseverance of walking in the gifting and the calling and the what's next of what God's asking you to do. Even
being able to just be who you are, even when you step into, in this case, speaking, not now transforming into this speaker who, we've talked in previous episodes where plastic kind of kicks in and it doesn't feel real. Yeah. But now going through that process of embracing this gifting, but also staying true to who you are, which is what made that a gift in the first place, because it's you being up there, being present as, Scott in this case. And so, kind of in a transition to kind of get us to the season you are, not what's going on now, but the season that has been the past couple of years. You've now surrendered to this gift. You're starting to communicate more. You're being faithful. That's really what it comes down to. You've been faithful in whatever you were asked. Zero agenda of what I hear. Love that. Very relatable to me too. And you're handed stuff. You're faithful in it. You're given more. And now something obviously begins to stir inside of you because you have surrendered to this speaking deal. You're being faithful to it. You're starting to conform a little bit more, understanding this is part of what I'm going to do. You're probably thinking, I'm going to do this for Ridge Church for the rest of my life, because that sounds like the heart you have. You're not looking to go anywhere. You love Pastor Tripp Healy, and something begins to stir. So can you start with that part of the season now and kind of take us through, which is ultimately leading to what you're doing now?
Yeah. So again, it goes back to people seeing stuff in me that I didn't see in myself. And I can remember in 2018 when I taught my first series at Ridge Church that the leadership sat me down and they were like, hey, we just want you to know, like, if you want more opportunities to speak, like if you want, they were like assuring me that, like, because they already saw something in me that I didn't see in myself and I didn't understand what they were saying at the time, but they were basically saying, hey, we don't want you to feel like you're going to outgrow your level of leadership here. So like whatever else we need to hand you, like we want to be able to hand you, which kudos to them. That's great leadership, right?
Sure
to say we see something in you and we don't want to smother that flame, but we want to fan it for you.
Very important.
And then fast forward to 2019, and there were just a lot of people in our life who kept saying things to us like, one day when you our lead pastor. One day when you have a church of your own, like stuff that we're not saying, like Kirsten and I are not having these conversations. Like I'm not thinking about going and planting a church because quite frankly, being a part of a church plant, even though I came a year and a half in, I saw what all it took. I saw what all it took to set up and tear down every week. I got to have I wouldn't call it a front row seat because y'all did move all the way to Idaho, Rep. But we saw you and Linda and y'all's faithfulness. Right. And, I was just like, I don't think I want that. Like, that's not what I want. And then people continuously said stuff and continuously said stuff and continuously said stuff. And so now it's this thing in the back of my head. It's just kind of this small thought that won't go away that inevitably became a conversation between me and Kirsten that was like, what if God was calling us to plant a church? Yeah. Like, what would that look like? And this is a funny story. We were on vacation. It was Thanksgiving week. So I guess at this point, it'd be almost 6 years ago. Thanksgiving week of 2019. So 5 years ago. And we were at Disney World. We just happened to take our family to Disney World for vacation. And
I know you. You guys are like Disney crazy.
Are they fanatics?
They're fanatics. We just happen to be at Disney. Like you guys are always.
Yeah. So
if we vacation,
everybody has those friends who are all about Disney, and you're listening to him right now. He's being very humble.
If you have 4 young kids, right, and at this time 3, it's like, do you know what entertains them? Mickey Mouse. I'm just saying.
And one of your daughters is named Snow. I mean, let's go.
True.
I mean, it's a beautiful name. She's amazing.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your conversation.
No,
you just happen to be at Disney.
No, you're bringing great context to where this is probably going.
So it's happening to be at Disney. Yeah.
Her legal name is Snowin, which is a great name.
I love it.
Way. Snowen. So if you want to steal that, don't say Snowden. The number of times people have been like, "Is your daughter named Snowden?" I was like, "No, I'm pretty." Didn't that person get in trouble for being like a traitor?
Let's stay away from that name.
Let's stay away from that name. But so we were at Disney, and it was on Thanksgiving Day. And we had taken our kids to the AMC movie theater in Disney Springs to see Frozen 2. Frozen 2 had just come out. And I didn't know anything about Frozen 2 other than that I'd seen Frozen a million times because I was a dad of 2 young daughters. And so they loved Frozen. And so I'd seen Frozen a bunch. And so here we go to see Frozen 2. And I think it's the second song of the movie. Elsa is singing a song called Into the Unknown. And there was a line in the movie in which she says, "Don't you know there's part of me that longs to go into the unknown?" And I'm a grown man who starts crying.
Let's go.
In a Disney movie. So don't tell me the Lord won't speak to you through anything.
Brother, you're talking to 2 right here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
We talked about that on our previous episode.
I mean,
don't make me talk about Toy Story.
Speaking to me, yeah.
We don't mean to interrupt your story, but
no, it's okay, Woody. Like, it's okay, Woody. I got this. You can go.
Should I? Oh my! Mine was The Greatest Showman. Like The Greatest Showman was like the movie that God spoke to me through and just confirmed everything that I was called to be the guy that goes and brings all this dysfunctional family together.
And Red almost talked me into going to Idaho with him because it was basically that scene between, it's called The Other Side, where it's Hugh Jackman and
I forget the other guy,
Efron. Zac Efron singing their song together. And I saw that. I would end up watching that movie like a year later, and I was like, that's what Rhett was. He wanted us to have a little singing duel where I agree and say, all right, 10.
Anyway, sorry, we don't mean to be taken away from your story. This is just this is armchair authentic, man. We just kind of rabbit trail.
We're trying to let you know we relate greatly with what you're saying. So God does speak through Disney movies or Pixar or whatever. So
into the unknown.
Continue into the unknown.
So I literally. Man, I'm teared up, grown man. I'm sure people are looking like, what is this dude doing? And I knew literally in that moment, I couldn't tell you anything else about the rest of the movie because all I'm thinking for the rest of the movie is we're supposed to plant a church. Like goodness gracious, we're supposed to plant a church. Like I'm scared to death. It's the unknown. And yet I know that there's part of me that wants to do this, and that I believe it's what God's calling me to. And what's funny is it's this big like mountaintop moment for me. And my wife, Kirsten, was 9 months pregnant at the time with our fourth child.
Cleaning up popcorn.
So like we get out of the movie theater, and I remember where we were standing in front of the movie theater, and I was like, hey, we're supposed to plant a church. Like the answer is yes. And she just goes, okay. I'm expecting some big,
are you crazy?
Climactic moment. Like that she's either going to fight me on it or like, we're going to have this like, absolutely. And she's just like, okay. And if you talk to her, she's like, I don't remember that moment. I was 9 months pregnant, but like, sure, that's exactly what we're supposed to do. And so
that's awesome.
From there, conversations began after the beginning of the year, just trying to honor our leadership and let them know
talk to me about that. Talk to me about that, because a lot of there are people who are listening and leaders who are feeling called to maybe plant a church or step out and create a ministry, a 501c3, or just take a step into the unknown. And I think the hardest conversation for somebody in your shoes is, how in the world do I tell my pastor? Because this is a very fireable offense, unfortunately, on many levels for many pastors across the country. And it shouldn't be. But for you, how was that experience? How did you approach your pastor, and how did he respond? And how was that blessing, curse? Like, oh God, we're losing our best person. Like, what was that? Yeah. What was that like, man?
Yeah, I think I've heard horror stories, right? And praise God, mine's not a horror story. So I sat down with Pastor Tripp, and I just told him, what I felt we were called to do. And
how long were you into the stirring at this point when you had the talk?
Man, it actually ended up not quite being January. It ended up being in December that we ended up having the conversation, but there had been a real stirring since August. And then there was that confirmation in November, and I just knew like I can't, and there were, unfortunately, at the time, we're a small church. And when I say small, 250, 300 people. So like everybody just knows everybody. And even though we had not said anything, and this is the crazy part, and this is what's so great about Pastor Tripp being one of my best friends in the world, is because he knows like we didn't say anything. But because other people had expectations on us that we were going to go plant a church, like there were these rumblings that forced me to have the conversation before January. Because before we went on vacation, we had not told anyone we were going to plant a church. We had not decided we were going to plant a church. But I felt like, even though we still hadn't told anybody, why would we tell anybody? That makes no sense. We wouldn't even know where we were going to plant a church, right?
Yeah, so, that's right.
And honestly, in my mind, I was thinking in 5 years. I wasn't thinking that I was going to do it anytime soon. I just knew that God was asking me to do something that I needed to say yes to. So I didn't know what timeline looked like. I just knew that God was asking me to say yes. But I just felt like I wanted to honor him, because I was like, you know what? If the answer is yes, he needs to know that the answer is yes. He needs to know, because if something gets said and then he comes to me and then I'm like, no, this is how I'm feeling, then it has the potential to become a, well, why didn't you tell me? Right. Type situation.
Yeah.
Because there were other people who were just saying things.
So you did what you did because there was a heart to honor your leadership.
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
Helped.
Absolutely.
But it was also more than just pizza the previous night. Even with that, you had already been months into this processing before you ever even took it.
Yeah, and it may seem quick, when you just go August to December, but I mean, that's a lot of thinking and a lot of processing and a lot of prayer and a lot of, I had to know that I heard from God to say yes to this. Yeah. And I think, I think that anybody who's planted a church would tell you that. Like, there's just, it's not something that you just say or you take, not if you really know what planting a church is. Yeah. Not if you've really had a front row seat to being portable and trying to build a team and those type things. And so we have the conversation, and, Pastor Tripp didn't fire me on the spot,
But honestly, did you even feel like that was even a thought, though, with the leader that you were serving? Was there even a thought thinking, well, based off of my relationship, I think I might be let go pretty soon if I bring up this conversation, or I know him and we're friends and he's entrusted me and he's secure and we can have a conversation.
Or it's the unknown, and he could be thinking, as much as I love this person, I've heard horror stories, so I don't know what really is going to happen.
Yeah.
Like it,
I think it's more what Justin just said, right? Because I'd heard other people's stories. And so there was security in the fact of like, I did not go into that meeting thinking I was going to lose my job. Like, that's not what I thought. What I did think was like, there was just so much uncertainty of how it was going to go, because there was misinformation from other people in the church at the time. And again, what's funny is to this day, none of us know how it started, but it ended up being a very good conversation, right? Like a little awkward at first because you're telling a friend who you love, who you're serving, who you're a big part of the church and the vision, that you feel called to leave, right? Like that's, I can appreciate Pastor Tripp's position now that I'm a lead pastor, right? That it's hard to understand that until you are the leader.
Yeah.
And that's something that I would always hear when I wasn't a lead pastor that I kind of brushed off. And I was like, oh, well, I got as much buy-in as he does, and I care as much as he does. But until you are the leader, and Rhett, you know this, like, you just know everything feels deeply personal, even if you don't want it to, right? Like, and even though somebody could be telling you, well, I'm going to do this because God's calling me to do this, in the back of your head, the enemy wants to tell you, well, they're just leaving because they don't like you. Like, even though that's the furthest thing from the truth. Like, that's not even remotely part of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, but again, we end up having a beautiful conversation. It was a long conversation. And, you know, he gave me some really great advice that day, just about figuring out where it was that we wanted to plant a church. You know, he encouraged me to kind of draw a dot on the map. This is where you live now and where your family is, and how far are you willing to move away from everything that you know? And one of his examples was, I don't know if you want to do what Rhett did. That's what he told me.
Yeah, because he and I were having conversations left and right going, oh my God.
Because he was just like, he was like, I think you would want to be able to drive home. Like, I don't think even if it would take a full day, like, I don't think you're going to want to have to either hop on a flight.
I don't think you're 30-hour material.
Don't talk yourself into thinking, you know, we'll just take a 4-day weekend trip. It'd take us 4 days to drive across the country. Oh, we'll pay for a flight. Well, that's $5,000 with 4 kids and you know, whatever. I mean, like,
I love the guidance of the fact that he's telling you that, because if it's an unhealthy leader, they're going to want you as far away as you can be. So the fact that he's looking after you, giving you advice of don't go as far as you could go potentially.
And to tell you how secure he was. I mean, in that conversation, he talked with me about what it would look like for us to be a sister church and kind of plant the next city over. Like,
would that be
something that we were interested in? So there was no
open hands all the way.
There was no like, oh, you're trying to. I think because he knew my heart and I knew his heart, and he knew that there was no like that I was trying to steal something or take something or split the church. Like, that's just not who we are. You know, like, we didn't take a single person from Ridge Church with us to plant Keys Church. You know, like we didn't. You know, we parachuted in solo, and so. We have that conversation, and he set the timeline because I said 5 years, and he was like, nah, he was like 2, and which seemed very sudden for me, because I've processed, okay, if I'm doing this, I need to go back to college, not because I felt at this point I had gotten past feeling the need to be educated. For my own securities, because of the way that I sermon prep and the seriousness that I take in studying scripture. I didn't feel that need, but what I wanted to do was alleviate that from being a barrier for somebody else to come under my leadership because, well, you don't have any formal training other than just being an associate pastor. And so
there was a framing that you had in your mind of what it should look like.
Absolutely. So at this point, like, I'm already getting paperwork filled out to enroll in college, and he knows that. And so we kind of put a date on the map ish, and was like, okay, like 2 years, but let's see. And his reasoning behind 2 years, one of his reasonings that was a lot of wisdom was, if you wait any longer than that, you may change your mind. And if you're actually certain that this is something God wants you to do, then you have to put a date on the map to then have the faith to actually do it.
Wow. That was wisdom.
Because if you wait, and I get it now, right? Because what if we get comfortable because we said 5 years, and here we are at what would have been that 5-year mark, and so we're just now going to plant a church? Or do we get comfortable enough where we are that we're like, nah, maybe we were never called to plant a church, and so then we kind of miss that window and what God was asking us to do. And so
that 2 years is healthy though, because if there is something on your heart and it's led you to get to the point to have to say something, it would make sense that you're probably not going to get to fully focus in what you're doing because there's something up here that's taking your attention. You still can give a lot to where you're at, but for only so long. And someone with wisdom like Tripp knows that. The people that I've talked to in the past, I mean, they would agree with that. But what I would also say is, going back to giving shout outs to when I hear things about leaders, I love that response of Pastor Tripp to be able to, you have that conversation with him and him also create a timetable, but the timetable isn't, well, let me tell you, it's time to go right now. You need to get up, go on, get.
All right. I know I said 2 years, but now it's a year. Now it's 6 months. Now it's 3 months. Hey, I'm tired. Get
That's
out.
a gracious number.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Because it helps you, and I think it honors where you're at as well. But that's just, once again, it's another testimony to your relationship of how you had served under the ministry at Ridge Church.
There were things that him and I discussed in that conversation, which I'm not going to say specifically what some of those things were, that were like, this is what we would want things to look like, even though some of these things may feel impossible at the moment, right? And because we were committed to leave well, and because they were committed to sending us out well, all of those things, without fail, have happened and have fallen into place. And Pastor Tripp and his wife Rebecca are some of our best friends in the entire world.
Wow, that's so great.
I just don't think there's a lot of people who leave somewhere and can say that about people who they served under for a long time, or that the people who they serve under would say the same thing about them. And so to me, it's just when you're committed to be faithful, and you're committed to love people like Jesus, and you're committed to honoring and putting people above yourself both ways. This wasn't just a me and Kirsten and I did this. Pastor Tripp and Rebecca did this, and other people at Ridge did this to us as well, that it has allowed us to feel like, hey, Ridge Church, we feel like we have two home churches, right? We have Ridge Church in Alabama, and then we have the church that we planted, Keys Church, in Florida. And it feels like they're sister churches. In a lot of ways, they feel like one church. But man, that's a tribute to God and his faithfulness.
Yeah, I think there's so much to honor in Pastor Tripp and honor in you and the way that you guys have handled that conversation, and honoring going in, honoring going out. And I know Pastor Tripp and Ridge Church blessed you guys tremendously and still have in helping support Keys Church and the vision. And that's amazing. So what I want to do now is I want to fast forward. There are so many micro details we could jump into, even the process of having to step out, move your family, find a home, build, all the stuff, get the team built, the launch on launch day. So, but let's fast forward to where we are now. So Keys Church, where are we? 2 years in, 2.5 at this point?
Yeah, little over 2 years.
A little over 2 years now. So my question to you is this: is it everything you thought it would be?
Oh man. No.
Thank you for that answer.
Thank you for the answer. Yeah, no, I asked that because it's a loaded question. I already know the answer to it, but I think people go into it thinking it's one thing, and then they find out it's actually another. And so talk to me. I know that there are some challenges. I know that, but with what you're willing to share in this season and what you're comfortable sharing, dive into that. Kind of dive in a little bit deeper. Is why is it not looking like you thought it would look, or feel like you thought it would feel, and in the thoughts and the process and what you're going through right now, 2 years in to a dream and to a vision that you probably had in your mind thinking it was one way, and it's kind of actually another right now.
Yeah. I want to start with this. Man, we are so blessed by ARC, the Associated Relation Churches, and the ARC family. And we launched with ARC, and we love ARC, and we support ARC. And as far as we're concerned, we'll always support ARC and what they're doing. And again, so honored to be a part. But I think some of the false expectation comes from a lot of times you only ever hear the success story. Like that's kind of, and And in a way, rightfully so, because you want to encourage people and you want people, and you're not trying to discourage people from going and planting a church. So you don't want to be like, hey, bro, this is going to suck.
Let me tell you how hard this is going to be. Are you sure you want to do this? Yeah.
So what's the hardest thing you've ever done in your life? Cool. Times that by 10.
Yeah.
And then feel like you're on an island and nobody cares and nobody understands, and feel like you're a failure and feel like you question everything, including your calling. And then let's see if you can just stick it out. Like you don't want to set up anybody that way. And so it's like, okay, let's be full of faith. And, there's a lot of talk of run the play, right? Like that's been the language for a lot of years, and just church planning in general. This isn't an exclusively ARC thing. So just run the play. So if you do A, B, and C, then these will be your results, without fail, is the way it's talked about, right? Now we know that that's not true, but a naive church planner has no idea. And so when I'm just told that if I just run the play, and I'm somebody who has always put my best foot forward and always done whatever it takes to do things with excellence and, to just make sure that things are attractional to people and to be relatable to people. And then you come and you run the play and the play got busted and you got sacked for a loss. It's like, wait a second, this was not this was supposed to go for a touchdown. Why did I just lose 13 yards? This doesn't make any sense.
That's a really good way to say it, bud.
And it's like, it makes you feel like a failure. There is no way around it. I'll give you an example. Our first interest party. Now we have the hindsight and the wisdom to know that, man, we should have been celebrating like nobody's business, but we had 65 people come to our first interest party. Okay. Keep in mind, we parachuted into a city 500 miles away where we knew no one, right? So to have 60 people who you did not know at your first interest party.
I'm hearing that and I'm thinking that's an amazing number.
Celebrate.
That was more than our first.
Should be something to celebrate, should be something to be excited about. But because when I was at a training and in a breakout, I was told about somebody who did things a certain way. And when they did it that way, they had 150 people show up to their first interest party, and 100 of those people chose to join their team that day. I mean, this is a story. I'm not making this up. Praise God that was their, that was their experience. That's amazing. I thought, well, we had about half the people they had show up, and we had 3 people sign up to join the team. We're failures. We're not going to be able to grow this team. Nobody's going to commit. And honestly, I can look back now and say that wrecked us in a way that it really derailed the rest of our planting season.
Wow, man.
Because we felt like failures from the jump, when really we should have been exciting and we should have been celebrating. And unfortunately, then there really was a decline in how many people we got to come to interest parties. The next one had 40 something people. The next one, had 20 something people. But then we had another one that was bigger. And then we tried to switch some things, and we did what we called invite nights to try to get people to come and kind of give them a taste of what we're trying to do. But it felt like an impossible uphill climb. And the number of times that I questioned, Lord, did I hear from you? Was this actually what you asked me to do? Am I just naive? Did I come down here based on, maybe my own pride and my own ideas, and I wasn't actually hearing from you, which, hey, by the way, none of that's true. And if you're a leader who has dealt with those feelings, man, the enemy will say anything to you. Always. To try to get you off mission.
Yeah,
always.
And the truth is, I just had the wrong expectations.
Yeah, it was an unhealthy comparison from what you had heard. Because it is interesting when you're telling the story, I'm looking at it even as you showed the numbers dwindling with each interest party, I'm still looking at it man, that's awesome. 20 people showed up.
Yeah.
But it all goes back to the framing.
Yeah. And for us, it's terrifying because to launch, here you are, we're trying to raise 4 kids and we're trying to get medical stuff taken care of. We're trying to get schooling stuff taken care of. And I'm finishing up school, but then I'm having to get a job to make ends meet. And then we're trying to recruit a team. And then, you know, you have to have a certain amount of people on your launch team to then be able to be approved to launch. And then trying to find a space to meet, and the finances, because of where we are, it's just not an affluent area. And so giving isn't what we thought it would be, even though we did a decent job raising our launch funds. And then I had a heartbreaking call from somebody who I really loved and respected. A week before we launched the church, they called to check on us. And I kind of was just honest with them and vulnerable. And they literally told me, had we known that this was the case, we wouldn't have greenlit you to launch. And I was like, bro, not really sure that's what I need to hear a week away from launch. Like,
based on you saying what you're at liberty to say.
Yeah, just kind of the whole like, hey, it just hasn't looked the way we thought it was going to look. And, you know, we, you know, have had a hard time getting people to commit to the launch team. And so like, we're really just right at that 40 number, barely, of people. And, you know, we're having to launch at night, because there is not a space for us to meet on Sunday morning. Like, this is a very crowded area where we live. And the one space that we got the okay to meet at for Sunday services, one, we didn't have enough people to fill that space because it's an 800 seat auditorium. But then two, it was $1,200 a week. Well, we didn't have the finances to pay $1,200 a week. Like, it would have killed the church within the first month. So like, sure, I could have done it in the name of maybe that was the thing to do. But instead, we found another space that we were going to be able to meet at in the afternoon. And so it was like, well, we're just going to have to launch with a 5 o'clock service. Like, it's not ideal. It's not what we want, but maybe it's what God's asking us to do. We definitely feel like, and we felt like our backs were so up against the wall at this point that we felt like if we didn't launch the church would die before it ever started. That the people who were committed to that launch date and were a part of the team, that they would leave if we didn't give them something tangible.
Sure.
Because something that we heard over and over again was like, well, we just need an event to show up to. And it's like, well, we got this interest where, like, no, like, we need a church service to show up to. Like, that's what people kept telling us. Like, they were not interested in having coffee. They were not interested in having dinner. And we did all those things, but that wasn't their interest. They were like, no, we'll get involved. We'll plug in. We'll whatever once you get the church launched. And so it was a combination of, you know, really barely hitting that number, not our finances not looking better, which, I mean, we raised $180,000. It's not anything to snub your nose up at.
But like, that was a lot more than I did, buddy.
You know, so
yeah. But
then meeting at night, and I was just told like, hey, that's not the way that we want to do things. And had we known, we just wouldn't have, you know, we would have pumped the brakes for you. And it was like,
so that's discouraging.
Not the most life-giving thing to hear. Oh, literally a week out from your launch.
Because you're already scared to death. I mean, people think, oh, well, you know, the church is going to launch. There's money. Like, no. We've spent everything on everything. We have nothing. Yeah. You know, there's no guaranteed paycheck coming in. There's no guarantee that anybody's going to show up.
I mean, like, anybody's going to show up.
Yeah,
tomorrow.
I mean, I have faith to believe it, but at the same time, I have enough doubt. I'm like doubting Thomas. So I'll see it when I believe. Like, you know, we'll see what happens. You know, that's how I felt. I was scared to death. I didn't get any sleep the night before.
Me and Rhett, when we were in Idaho, I came up for his first service, and we were peeking around that curtain all the time to see, did anybody come in
walking in? Oh God,
might just Rhett, just stay in the back. I'll go be your sight. Don't look out right now.
Yeah. And in my mind, what was so bad was that we were close enough that we had a lot of people come down to well wish us, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm counting going, oh,
they'll be gone next week.
Half of these people won't be here next week, minimum. You know, like, and so, you know, we launched with close to 150 people, which is great.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
And it was great, but again, exactly what they tell you happens is what happens. The next week it's 70, and the next week it's 50, and the next week it's 40, you know. Mm-hmm. And what we realized really quickly was we thought that meeting at nights would one, we did it out of necessity. So I don't want to try to act like it was some vision thing where we were like, oh, we're going to meet at nights and be different.
You improvise.
But you know what you do as a leader is you then try to make it a vision thing. And you're like, so now we can reach people who work second or work, on Sundays during the day, and we can do that and we can do that, So
you're reframing the vision for where you actually are in this season. Yeah.
And everybody was so excited. And like they came the first couple weeks and then it became really clear that, man, do you think there's a lot of excuses not to get up on a Sunday morning and come to church? There's so many more when you wait the whole day to then come to church. It's like, I can do anything but be at church.
I'm tired.
So
and the one thing you haven't mentioned yet is the culture that you were called to. I mean, you were not called. Yes, different. Some people might look on the map and go, "Oh, well, Orlando, that's the South." It ain't the South, y'all. I mean, once you get past the Panhandle of Florida, you are no longer the South. You're in another country. And it's a melting pot. I've had the opportunity to be there twice, and I love your church family, and I love the Puerto Rican culture. It's just but it's very family oriented. It's very community driven. It's like, and they're hanging out, man, at the barbecue at the park, baby, on Sunday afternoon, right? Not at church. Right?
Yeah. It's just very different. And for people who don't understand that culture and that context, we're not a very big church. And Kirsten and I were counting the other week because we were talking with somebody. And we have 7 different nationalities represented in our little church. Like we are very much a multicultural church. And again, Pastor Rhett's been there. Like he comes and now he's one of 3 white people in the room. Like that's like,
I love it. I feel, and they make me feel so welcome. They're high-fiving, hug. Like it's awesome.
It's great.
I love it.
It's great. Yeah. But it is different. And you're absolutely right. And that is a big, big part is, we learned when we were doing these invite nights, we learned that, we did the 5-minute countdown, traditional, like a lot of churches do. To this day, our 5-minute countdown starts at the beginning of service. It starts at 10. Like it doesn't start at 9:55. Yeah. And because everybody's late and they joke around and they say, well, we're all on island time. Well, that's a real thing.
It is a real thing.
Like that's a real culture thing. And to this day, we have some families and they've been around since the beginning, and I love them with all my heart. And they'll show up in the first point of my sermon every week. Like the service time's the same. Like it hasn't changed. Like the distance that you're driving is the same. But that's just culture. Yeah. Right. And I'm just glad they're at church. So
and those are the things. And those are the things you're learning as you're there. It's like you're actually planting. You're a farmer in new soil that is not, the deep South where everybody's culture is you go to church and you show up on time, right, and you end on time, right? No, now you're in a whole new culture, a whole new soil. I tell people this: you can't plant bananas in the Northwest. Banana trees don't grow. You plant banana trees or even palm trees. They don't grow up in the Northwest. No. They grow in a very humid climate with a particular soil, and you're learning that, and you're having to adjust. You have the vision, but your process is having to change according to the culture that you're in, and all of that's good. But those are the things that can really wreck somebody if you're like, we got to start on time, we got to end on time, it's got to look like this, got to we got to run the play, got to do this, and man,
it can be discouraging.
And so I'll say this to any church planner who's dealt with this or aspiring church planner, like just know you can run the play and it not work. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Like that's just the truth. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you're a failure. And it doesn't mean that what you're doing doesn't matter. But for us, that was a reality that was hard for us to wrap our mind around, that took a lot of prayer and a lot of maturity and a lot of wonderful people like Rhett speaking into my life and reminding me that I'm not a failure. Because there were people who know us and who are around us and who have seen what we've done. And they're like, you've done everything that you could possibly do. And it just is what it is. And that's okay. And when you become okay with that, that's where the fun begins, right? And that's where you become thankful and you become able to celebrate little wins, and they're not even just little wins anymore. They're big wins. And I'm not, praise God for the church that's had, 5,000 salvations in their first 2 years of the church. Man, we've had 42 and all 42 of those people matter, and we're thankful to be a part of it, and that God would choose to use us. And what would their stories be had we not come and started Keys Church? And so for us, it's like, we are so okay with where we are now, but it took a year and a half a year and a half for us to get okay with it, because eventually we did move from Sunday nights to the Lord opened the door for us to meet on Sunday mornings. So we launched in September of 2022. January of 2023, we moved to Sunday mornings. It's where we currently meet now. Actually, check this out, guys, paying less than we were paying to meet at nights, which is like unheard of in this area. So you're talking about just the Lord's provision and what we're paying in the space that we're in. And it hasn't all been rainbows and sunshine. As a matter of fact, our worst Sunday as a church was week 2 in the new space. So many people showed back up week 1 of meeting Sunday morning. Like we had kind of dwindled down to around 20 to 25 people. We had like 35 people in week 1 of meeting back on Sunday mornings. And we were like, let's go. Like, this is, again, naivety. I'm like, this was the Band-Aid. Like, we have fixed it. We just weren't meeting on Sunday mornings. Like, let's go. The exponential growth is on the way. Like, this is, and I'm trying to protect myself from these things. But in the back of my head, if I'm being honest, like this is, I'm trying to be full of faith, so it's like, this is going to be the case. And it was 30 degrees the next Sunday morning. And I don't know if you know anything about Central Florida. It doesn't get 30 degrees.
That is
here.
Wild.
And I found out that not only do iguanas fall out of trees when it's 30 degrees, but people don't get out the bed.
Are you
know
serious?
what I'm saying?
Oh man, I got this little picture of iguanas just dropping like flies out of all the trees.
Hey, no, I'm telling you, look it up. Like, we'll get a falling
funny.
iguana warning.
Oh
because
man,
they will fall out the tree.
Are you serious? Today on the news, we got iguana warning. We're hitting 31 degrees. So be careful of all the trees you walk under today, because you might be knocked out.
But you'll probably be fine, because everybody is still in bed.
Everybody is, every last one of them. And so
why don't they make a Disney Pixar movie about iguanas falling out of trees at 31 degrees?
Because it never goes under 30. And where you're living,
you could write a song. I mean, iguanas falling out of trees, that almost has a rhyme to it. Like iguanas falling out of trees. Anyway, sorry.
And I'm pretty sure that's the coldest morning it's been since we've lived here. And of course, it fell on a Sunday morning. And so
literally
we go and we set up, and here we are. It's like, is anybody going to come? 5-minute countdown starts. Like, we have the people leading worship. We have me. We have Kirsten. We have my amazing mother-in-law, Cammie, who's running sound for us, and pro presenter. She's doing both at the same time.
And camera.
And camera. She hit record on the camera. And there's 2 people who walk in. 2. And then we're sitting there during worshiping, and then 2 more people walk in. So now there's 4. There's 4 people who aren't there to serve, and then my kids are in kids ministry, and a volunteer. And the power goes out during song 3. The power trips. And it's our second week in the space. I have no clue where the power box is. Like, you want to talk just like an embarrassment of riches. Like what else could possibly go wrong? And
but wait.
The power goes out. And so, like, I just get up and I pray, because like it went out in the middle of the song. And so then they're just like, I guess we'll do a cappella worship with, all we had was a keyboard and
that's electric. So you're hearing plastic now.
Yeah. And a djembe. And so now it's just a djembe, and then somebody singing a cappella, and there's 4 people in the room. And I was just like, there's no way that I'm about to try to teach a message in the dark. Like, that's just like, we're not
I love your honesty. Hey, thank you so much for your honesty and vulnerability. I mean, this is real life. These are the stories right here, man. This is why you're on the podcast.
This is the session at our conference that you have a breakout room. It says, we've told you some really great stuff, and you need to have that. But we need to give you a heads up on some stuff that could happen.
Yeah, so
go to this room right
here. So you might have some iguanas falling out of trees with 2 people, a power going out, and like, dear God, what did I just do?
So don't let this scare you away, but be very aware this could happen to you. So I go up and I pray, and, the worship team, the guys, they came from the university that I was connected to. And so they were like, all right, well, we're going to leave. And I'm like, well, that's awkward, bro. Like, thanks for coming to lead worship, I guess. Like, it was just really weird, because I think they were also like, what do we do? And the way that our room is set up is cafeteria, and there's a room in the back of the cafeteria. Well, that room still had power. It just killed everything that our lights and our speakers were plugged into kind of in the front. Like, we just didn't know that we needed to spread out stuff differently for the sake of the power grid. And I just told the 4 people, I was like, let's go to the back room and man, let's just have small group. And we just went and talked about the sermon from the week before and talked about some things in the sermon series that we were in. And all 4 of those people are still at our church.
Come on.
All 4 of those people still serve at our church.
So cool.
One of those families, it was the first time we had the opportunity to take them out to lunch. They stuck around and helped us tear down. I joke with them and I say, I know y'all just stayed because you felt bad for us. Like there was no like y'all are good people. Yeah. But you stayed because you felt bad for us, and they just laugh. You know, they neither confirm. I can neither confirm nor deny. No. That's why we stayed. And I just remember being like so defeated, and yet honestly, it's just been a steady climb from there, right? It's steadily gotten better.
Can I jump in for a second? If be honest, you and Kirsten sitting around the dinner table that evening, or after you loaded and packed up the trailer, was that the moment you're like, all right, I'm done. Pastor Tripp, you want to hire me back, baby? We'll be there next weekend. I mean, was that going through your mind, or were you sitting there thinking, no, we know God's called us, and I know this is hard, and this is not what it was supposed to look like in our minds, but we're called here, and we're going to persevere and push through.
So the truth of the matter is, for me, the burden has always been financial. The burden has not been how many people are in the room. The burden has been, can we continue to afford to do this? And through the Lord's provision and some wisdom that he gave me in the beginning with some of our finances of, hey, I know conventional wisdom is to spend every dime you get on advertising and everything else. I was just like, some of this needs to go in a rainy day fund because I just don't think our giving's going to be what I hoped it was going to be. Because at this point, I'm working a full-time job.
Yeah.
Which that's something.
Which is two full-time jobs, as a pastor and a church planner, as a dad, and 3 as a husband.
That's something to note, because you're working it's a lot of times in the rules, if you will, there's the exception. Yours has become more of the exception, which you don't put God in a box. The exceptions are always there, and that can even become new norms. And so in your case, you would have loved ideally to be full-time on staff at your church, and it just didn't work that way. So you had to provide for your family. So you're working a job and the full-time job of being a pastor and taking care of your wife and kiddos.
Give me, us knowing that, give me just a glimpse of what your weeks were like before you were able to move on to full-time, as far as, with the church providing for you. So a week, and you don't have to go into micro, but just give me an overview. You're up at 3:30 in the morning, 4:00, you're sermon prepping. Talk me through that really quick so people can get an idea of what your life was like for almost 2 years.
Yeah. So I would wake up Monday through Thursday at 4:00 in the morning, and I would get up and praise God for a coffee pot that has the timer on it where the coffee can be made when you step into the living room in the morning. But I would wake up and I would sermon prep from 4 till 6 or 6:30. And then I would get dressed and I would go to work, and I was the director of IT at a local Christian university, and I would go and I would work until 4:00, and I would come home and we would lead small groups, and we would reach out to people, and we would care for people, and we would, care for our children and raise our kids and try to do date nights and everything else that you're supposed to be doing as a church planner and as, a father and as a husband. Like, all of that was reserved for after 4:00 because I had a job from 7 to 4 every day. And that was my life for, up until July of this year. So, and I'll say this, like, it's easy to look at something like that and go, oh man, that stinks. Like, how unfortunate. Like, man, what a bummer. Like, I hate that you have to do that. Like, I praise God that I had to do that because I had to learn how to manage my time. And about a 1 month period, if this church was going to continue, and if I was going to be a good father, and if I was going to be a good husband and a good leader, like, I had to learn to manage my time really quickly. And I think had I had the freedom to be full-time in ministry, it may have taken me years to learn to manage my time.
What a great perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, I was forced to get up early, and everybody's just wired different, right? So for me, I always tell people, I'm not a morning person. So it's not like I wake up and I'm like, man, hey, Rhett, hey, Justin, how are you guys doing? Like, I'm so like, that's not, I'm not a morning person in that way, but I'm most productive in the morning.
Yeah.
So like my brain, my creativity, like it is on 10 from the moment I wake up.
Yeah. Same.
And for the first 3 or 4 hours of the day. And at night, it's just a struggle. And so it became clear to me, if I'm trying to sermon prep once my kids go to bed, I'm going to be sermon prepping from 8 to 1 o'clock in the morning every day and not spending any time with my wife. Or I can wake up at 4 o'clock and I can get done in 2 hours what would take me 5 hours once my kids go to bed, because I'm just more creative.
Yeah.
In those late night sermon preps, by the way, it will make you sound like a space cadet when you're talking.
Oh yeah.
Because you'd be like, where did that idea come from? That was, I noted that at 1 a.m. as I wake up from my, on the couch.
That's true.
That's so cool. I relate to what you're saying on that early morning.
Yeah.
You've learned how to utilize your energy. And it's like, Rhett, the story that we've used this so many times, but it really is. It's like you've taken what could have taken years to learn. If you gain the whole world, lose your soul. What you've maintained in this process is you've prioritized your family. Yeah. You've still prioritized your congregation. And I think of David going out to the field, having to care for the sheep. It was nothing that anybody would have desired. And he stepped out there every day and he took on the role that his father had called him to do. And it was in that season of taking care that he learned how to protect what was his. When the lion and the bear, and he learned how to use that sling. He probably learned how to play that, harp out in the field, just kind of chilling. And he used every bit of that later in his life. And it was preparing him. And every time you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, this is such a setup for you. Like what you're getting to see now, but this is a setup for also things that God knows. I call it authentic humility. And what I mean by that is I see authentic humility as it's a state of contentedness in accepting the responsibility, like being aware of your responsibility and then fully stepping into them, at the same time acknowledging that what's happening right now, there's something greater for what I'm actually doing this right now for. And when you can live in that mindset, and that's what I'm hearing from you, there's no greater place to be than authentically humble.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. That's good. And just trying to have that perspective, right? And you don't have that perspective every day. Like, right. I don't want to act like every day was me just like choosing to have this great perspective. Cause going back to what you asked, Rhett, about, was like, was this a season in which you were like, hey, do I want to, do I just want to quit? Do I just want to hang this up? It's like, yeah. Like, do I want to? Like, yeah, I want to, but I felt like, Peter, where else am I going to go, Lord?
Yeah.
Like you're the one with the words of life. Like, I just know this is what I'm called to do. And this is the last thing you asked me to do. And so until you give me the next thing to do, I got to continue doing the last thing that you told me to do. And so I can't jump ahead of you and I don't want to fall behind you. And, Kirsten and I just decided, like, the Lord will make it clear if the grace on this season ends. He will make it clear if this door is ready to shut. But until then, like, we just push forward and we have faith and we just try to be good stewards and we try to be good leaders and we try to love people and we try to point them to Jesus, and everything else is going to work. Like, that's what our faith is. Yeah. It's just that everything else is going to work out. Like, if we just try to love people and lead them to Jesus, everything else will work out.
I love that, because what I'm hearing is, what you're not saying is, once we hit 100 or 150 or 200 or 250 or through whatever that number might be for whoever, then we'll be satisfied and know, what, we're successful. But what I'm hearing from you is, man, we're successful in being obedient to what God has called us to do. And that's to be faithful in loving God and loving the people he's called us to in this season. And because of that, I know, because I've experienced it, there are families whose legacies and family trees have been changed for generations because of your love, your sacrifice, your availability, your investment, your time with them in the church, and being able to invest in leaders and meet them right where they are and love them in small groups and community. And I mean, people's families have been dynamically changed because of your availability and your investment. So you guys have been hugely successful, massively successful for the kingdom of God. That success, I think we have to define what success is. What is success?
Yeah, that's right.
And so what I'm hearing you say success is loving God, loving my family, loving the church that he's called me to. It's not about a number. It's not about a platform. It's just about being obedient and being faithful and just loving the people and enjoying the moment and loving the people who are right in front of me and giving them my best.
Yes. And being faithful in what you've been given.
Yeah.
And he'll and then let him decide how he decides to move along in this process for you. And it's an enduring.
Yeah.
And I love how when I said what I said, I love, Scott, how you jumped in there to say, it's not just, I just wake up every morning, rainbows and unicorns. And that's what I love too. It's okay to have those days of what in the world is going on. When you can endure in a situation like that, it's almost a parallel of Jesus saying, well, it's easy to love people who love you. Go love somebody who doesn't. Well, it's easy to live your best life when everything's working out for you. But how are you going to live when you actually have to make the decision to endure? And the fruit of the Holy Spirit that is producing in your life and people who come across your path is evident even in our conversation talking to you, Scott.
Yeah, man. I'm reminded of, you had brought up David, and it's like, just read Psalms, right? Like, Lord, where are you? You've forsaken me. You've turned your back from me. Like, oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Like, oh, there you are. And it's like, you're so right, man. Like, it's okay to have bad days. And I think leaders and pastors and just Christians, just fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, hear us. Like, it's okay to have a bad day.
Absolutely.
Like it's okay, to feel down in the dump. Now, don't let a bad day become a bad season. Right. Surround yourself with life-giving people, be in the word, remind yourself of what's true. But man, again, Pastor Rhett is one of my overseers. He knows this. Like, I've called him on bad days. Like, we've had conversations. We've had real difficult conversations about what does the future look like if things don't change? Because all of those things have to be real conversations, and praise God, we're in a situation where this past July, I was able to go full time with the church. And I don't think I would have ever envisioned that a year ago. I would have wanted to have the faith for it, but honestly, I wouldn't even allow myself to have the faith for it because I would have just felt like I was going to be disappointed. Right. But the Lord has been faithful, and it's been beautiful to see our church grow and the people in our church to understand our vision and what we're doing.
Yeah.
And now for me to be able to give all of my time and my resources over to the church, which has allowed me to give my time and resources over to different things in our community, which, allows me to do amazing things like this as well, to sit and to be on a podcast with you guys, which is things that I would have had to say no to before, and I went through a season of having to say no to some really good opportunities. And that wasn't easy. Like, it's not easy to be like, hey, can you come to this lunch and we're going to have this thing and there's going to be these leaders and can you come be a part of this and we're going to have this retreat and can you? And it's like, nope. But you can't let those things discourage you.
Yeah.
Like, you have to realize maybe it is just a season, and maybe the season for you is going to be longer than the year and a half it was for me. Maybe it'll be shorter, but trying to keep the right perspective. And there'll be good days on that, and there'll be bad days on that.
Yeah. To me, everything I've heard today is a story of victory. And that's why we wanted to have you on the podcast, because we wanted to have you tell this story, because it's not always conventional in this predictable where it's only up from here. Mm-hmm. I love the stories where it doesn't go, where it's so God being put in a box. And the way that you've explained people are feeling you when you're talking about the power going out. Any potential church planner right now is envisioning, thinking, oh boy,
Well,
I have to be aware that I'm signing up for that potential thing.
They'll be aware of it, but they'll also be naive and thinking, "Oh, that's not going to happen to me." And then it's going to happen to them. They're going to "Oh, wait, I remember that podcast." And they're going to reach out to Scott.
That's right. They're going to say, "I'm reaching out to Scott at Keys Church because of the testimony that I heard." So I'm grateful that you've taken the time to share your story on that.
Yeah. So one thing I want to jump into as we begin to close this, there's so many, Scott, I believe there's going to be a part 2 at some point where we have you back on and talk more about maybe just the way this has impacted your family and your wife and your kids and the growth through that as a husband and as a dad. There's things I want to dive into there that I believe will be very beneficial to people in the future who decide to plant a church. But before we close this, you're not going to say this about yourself, but I noticed a journey you went on this year regarding your health. Your physical health. You've always been disciplined. You've always had, I've seen it, with your faithfulness in audio, video, lighting, production, preaching, communication, the way you love your family, the way you love your wife, the way you handle your finances. But something transformed in you this year. I don't know where it came from, but I have to speak to it because, again, we're not doing video, but seeing you and being a part of your life, man, you have physically transformed this year, physically in your health. And so, really quick, give me a 30,000 foot view of what in the world happened. How much weight did you lose? How did you do it? And like, where did all that come from? Because bro, you look good, man. You're fit. The word is fit right now. And I'm noticing this about incredible leaders like yourself. I mean, you're really taking care of yourself in that regard. How are you doing?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So, I guess I should start with, I have, a heart condition that is a genetic thing. My dad has it where we have arrhythmia. I inherited it. It generally doesn't have, I would have probably suffered with it regardless of what my health is, but it can be exasperated by being unhealthy. And so when I'm under lots of stress, then my heart will go out of rhythm. When it doesn't get itself back in rhythm, then there has to be medication or there has to be where they shock your heart back into rhythm. I've had to have that happen before. Last year, I had a bout of that. They were able to get it back in rhythm, but then they said, "Hey, we need to go in and do an ablation." And this is a procedure where they go in and they burn some electrical ends in your heart. I don't know how that works. I don't know who was the first person who was like, "Hey, the heart is like an electrical box. And if we just burn some stuff, your heart will beat the right way." Praise God for people who are way smarter than me. But they said, "Hey, if we do this, one, you're young, you're healthy, and it'll just, the chances of this kind of eliminating this for you, it's really good. It's like 90-something%. So like you should do this. Don't let, heart surgery at 33 scare you. Like you need to do this." And so okay. So last November, I had that done, and you would have thought that maybe that would be the catalyst to like, now you need to be healthy as a pastor and a father of 4. But there was just always an excuse, right? Because I do fancy myself as at least a semi-disciplined person, right? When we talk about waking up at 4 to sermon prep and those type things and being in the Word. But I used my discipline in every other area of my life to be an excuse to not be disciplined when it came to my health and what I ate and then exercise. Because my excuse was I basically work 2 full-time jobs because I'm a pastor and I work a full-time job and I'm a father of 4. And so I don't have time to think about what I'm eating or to try to exercise or any of those things. And so we did 21 days of prayer and fasting at the beginning of this year. And I was doing a liquid fast at the beginning of 21 days of prayer. And during that liquid fast, I just felt the Lord convict me and was just like, how are you going to tell people to be spiritually disciplined when the only discipline in your life they can actually see with their eyes is your body? Mm. Like they can't actually see my spiritual discipline. Like they can't see what kind of father I am. Like for the few who really are close to me and get an inside look at me and my children and me and my wife and, maybe know some of my study habits and stuff, like they see the discipline. But for the regular person, and then I had a friend of mine who was doing a fitness thing called 75 Hard. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. Or you've
I'm only familiar because of you and your Instagram post. Yeah. It's and insanity is what it is. 75-day hard. So we'll talk about that.
We'll get to that in a second. So I saw him doing it, and there's this guy and he has a podcast and he's the creator of it. And I'm not recommending that because language and things like that. But I was watching some clips my buddy was posting this guy, and I went and listened to one of his podcasts. And I remember hearing from the Lord and the Lord saying, see, you wouldn't be able to reach somebody like that because he would never listen to a word that comes out of your mouth because of the way you look. And I just thought, is my health being a stumbling block to me reaching people with the gospel? And I want to make this very clear. This is a personal conviction for me. This is not me saying this about anybody else, about any other pastor. And I'm definitely not saying that your health makes you, if you're not extremely physically fit, you can't reach people for Jesus. Like, we were reaching people for Jesus when I was overweight. Like, it's fine, It was a personal conviction for me of what I felt like the Lord was asking me to do. And it's just an area of my life that I had ignored for so long. And it was sin. And we don't like to say that about overeating and obesity or any of those things. Like, we don't like to say it because it feels harsh. But it is sin, and it was sin for me. And really, maybe for the first time in my life, I saw it as sin. And when I did, I couldn't unsee it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't give the excuses anymore. And so it just started with, I'm gonna eat healthy. Like, and what does that look like? So did a little bit of research, and it's like, okay, we're just gonna go trying to eat healthier, gonna eat high protein, going to, not just count calories, but count my macronutrients. First time in my life I've ever done anything like that. I always thought like gym bros count macros, and I'm not a gym bro. So like, that's not going to be what I do. But I was like, okay, well, I'll try this. And then I found like, oh man, when I eat more protein, I'm more full throughout the day, and therefore I don't eat as much. And then I just started with walking, because I was seeing some stuff about how walking is really kind of one of the best forms of burning fat. And then I incorporated, they call it rucking, which is just weighted walking with either a backpack or a vest. So then I started doing that. And then over the course of, first several months, you end up losing a lot of weight. But then I watched my buddy do 75 hard. And what 75 hard is it's a workout program in which for 75 days, in order to complete this for 75 days straight, you have to work out 2 times a day. A minimum of 45 minutes each workout. One of them has to be outside. Like, that's a non-negotiable. You have to be on some sort of diet. You're not allowed to consume any alcohol. You have to read 10 pages of a book of your choosing. It doesn't matter what it is, but you have to read 10 pages of a book, like a physical book, not an audio book, every single day. You have to weigh yourself every day. You have to take a progress photo every single day. And I may be missing something, but I should know. I did it for 75 days.
Well, that in itself is yeah, that's hard. That's harder than hard. That seems impossible for, a lot of people.
Yeah. And so when I went full time with the church in July, I prayed about it. And I said, as I'm starting being full time in ministry again, what I'm not going to do is fall back into old habits. What I'm not going to do is start being complacent and undisciplined with my time. And so I'm going to do 75 hard for the first 75 days that I'm in full-time ministry, like at Keys Church. Like, that's going to be what I do. And so that's what I did. And I did 75 hard. And so, which was good. It started me, doing some weight training and working out more, which is just good for overall health.
Did you miss a day? And if you missed a day, do you have to start over?
Yeah, if you miss a day, you have to start over. So I did not miss a day.
There you go.
I did not miss a day. I checked. Oh yeah, you have to drink a gallon of water every day too. Okay. That's on there.
Would you mind me asking how much weight that you've lost?
I think that it's 65 pounds. So it may be more than that, because I did not weigh myself until it was towards the end of 21 days of prayer and fasting. So and I weighed 249 pounds.
Wow. My
guess is I was probably at 255. And right now I'm at 185.
Come on, bro.
Wow.
I'm so proud of you.
So good.
I mean, that just speaks to the discipline, your heart, your faithfulness, and just being obedient, even in what God was asking you to do personally. And I appreciate you setting that up and not putting that kind of weight or, if you will, or that kind of pressure on other people, because it is an individual journey with the Lord for each of us. But you have inspired me. And I'm telling you, I told Justin, I said, I've got to get better. I got this buddy doing this. I'm not doing 75 hard. I'll just start with walking. And I did. I started with walking.
Just
and
walk, bro.
yeah, man, seriously, it's amazing what a mile a day will do. I mean, at first I couldn't even do that. I could barely walk to the mailbox, but you always have looked good. You've carried weight well, but it's amazing to me to see the transformation. I've always seen it spiritually, but now to see it line up physically for you too it's an inspiration and an encouragement. So proud of you. Way to go.
Amazing, bro.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you, guys.
Well, man, it's been so great to have you on the podcast. If people want to follow you, see more about the church, I know I mentioned the website earlier, but how can people, if they want to reach out to you, inspire you, encourage you, even maybe give to your ministry if they feel so led to do? I mean, how could people be a part of what's going on in Scott, Kirsten, and Keys Church?
Yeah, so if you want to find out more about Keys Church, you can just go to keyschurch.com. Kind of see the website. If you feel like the Lord wants you to invest in what we're doing in Central Florida, you can do that from there. If you're interested in what we're doing on social media, my wife runs our social media, and I'm not saying this because she's my wife, but she does an excellent job. And so if that's something that you're interested in for your church and being visually aesthetic and that type thing, you can check us out at Keys Church FL for Florida on Instagram. And then personally, I'm just at _Scott Lawrence on Instagram.
Hey, Scott, it was so good to have you today on Armchair Authentic, man. Just such an amazing story. And I hope people definitely check out what's going on with you.
If I had one last question for you, that is, do you have any final thoughts that you would want to share before we close this episode? Anything on your heart that you're thinking, man, I'd just like to share this to a leader out there today? Is there any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would say never underestimate the power of being faithful. And don't let the enemy tell you that your faithfulness is you being fake. Because the enemy will tell you that you doing the things that you want to in the moments that you don't want to do them. You asking for forgiveness, you being in your Bible, you praying when you don't feel it, that somehow that's you just checking a box, that somehow that's just you being fake, but that's you being faithful. And it's you taking that next step to looking more like Jesus and becoming who it is that God's created you to be. So be faithful.
On the next episode of Armchair Authentic, we are celebrating Thanksgiving.
It's the purple stuff, baby. Like it comes in a can.
Oh gosh.
It's so good.
Cranberry
Oh,
sauce?
it's amazing. Like, dude, you cannot have Thanksgiving.
Awful.
How are we even friends?
Sweet potatoes.
You're
and
an Alabama fan. I'm an
like,
Auburn fan. You
they came
you
from
hate
Auburn.
sweet potatoes. I love sweet potatoes.
Gosh.
You don't like cranberry sauce.
Hate
I
it.
love it. Dude,
It's
let me
the
hold on.
same, evokes the same gag
Dude,
response.
it's
Those
fruit.
two things.
It's like a fruit. I mean, it's fruit, right?
I love
think
cranberry
it's fruit.
juice.
That makes no sense.
I hate it. We're really looking forward to that episode. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this episode, would you do something for me? Would you take out your phone? Would you copy the link and send it to a friend? We would really appreciate that. Thank you. Well, until next time, we hope you have a fantastic week. See you soon.